Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, CXnext, a sneak peek into the future of CX. I'm thrilled to have everybody here. We'll get started here in just a couple of seconds. I do want to give everybody a chance to actually get into the webinar platform here. While we're doing that, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this, and we will make this recording available to everybody who registered, so you don't have to feverishly take notes on this. You'll have both the recording as well as the actual slides. So we'll make both of those available. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I see a number of familiar names and faces on here. If you have questions as we're going through here, we want to make this pretty collaborative, kind of a fireside chat sort of model on it. So please put questions into the chat, put them into the Q&A tab. We'll take them as we go through there and go from there. So let me start by introducing my partner, co-founder in this business, Chief Product Officer at ClearlyRated, and longtime friend of mine, Nathan Goff. Nathan, welcome to today's session.
Thanks, Eric. I'm excited to be here, be able to talk about something that I'm super passionate about and live and breathe every day. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is an insight into really kind of a conversation that you and I have in a less formalized manner on a pretty regular basis and have had for the last 15 years. So we'll hopefully make it interesting for the rest of this group as well. As I mentioned before, I'm Gregg. I'm the founder and now the customer experience strategist, CXS, at ClearlyRated. For those that didn't see that, we brought on a new CEO just recently, and I'm thrilled to have him join and bring his expertise in the growth SaaS market as well. Frees me up to do more of this type of work, which is really the stuff that I'm most passionate about. So yeah, I'm not going to focus a lot on ClearlyRated specifically, but I do want to kind of do a little humble brag here right at the start. We are really, really proud of the work that we're doing in the space, of the people we're partnering with. Our goal is to become the CX platform for service firms. And we're got to start by really taking our own medicine. 89% of customers rate us a 9 or a 10. 96% say we help them differentiate. 97% report a positive ROI. And we run the programs for 400 plus firms, protect over $80 billion in revenue. And really the reason why I wanted to share that, other than the fact that ultimately we are for profit, we have to be in business, and we want to work with those of you on the call, is that to hopefully understand the unique perspective that Nathan and I get into this space, because we do a lot of thought leadership into this space, but we also have the benefit of seeing 400 plus programs, what works, what doesn't work. And that's going to be a lot of what we're sharing today, is some of the research, some of the data that we follow, and then really hopefully some actual practical thoughts and suggestions, conversations around overcoming some of those common roadblocks. So we've split it into 3 sections. Some of the key trends, what top firms are doing differently that we're seeing, and then overcoming some of the common roadblocks. And we'll spend the majority of the time on that roadblock section of it as well. So let's start with some of the key trends. The first one, this is really interesting. We've been kind of tracking this for a while. And the question essentially is, like, in general, do you prefer to sort of self-serve and utilize technology, or do you prefer to have a person who you're working with who's helping you to accomplish your goals when you're working with a professional service firm? And what we see on this is, a pretty even split. You can make arguments either way, but people kind of slightly leaning towards strongly or somewhat preferring to self-serve in that camp. What's interesting is that we've tracked this over the last couple of years, and we're seeing that each year over the last few years, there's been a higher percentage of them that are preferring to self-serve. And additionally, when we cut this and we look at Gen Y or younger, those numbers go up significantly. There's definitely a break by generation. Gen Xers are starting to act more like Gen Y. We saw this through the pandemic, where Gen Xers started to pick up more technology-first approaches, in part because they needed to. And so really, when you look at this, Gen Y and younger, which will be about 2/3 of the workforce by 2029, according to Pew Research projections, that is a very much a self-serve oriented audience. And so the way that I like to get people thinking about this is that the ideal solution in working with a professional service firm for a client is that they can be on a freeway and they can drive at their own pace. They can choose when to drive, where to drive, what they want to do. And that is basically the user experience that they have utilizing your technology, utilizing the things you have in place to support them. That's the freeway component. But what they also want is a lot of off ramps, a lot of exit ramps. And those exit ramps are your people. They are the expertise, the support, the professionals that you have in place to help them get answers to questions, to help them to get expertise, to get context that they can't get out of the technology as a part of this. And I think that that's a really key way to think about this, right? The freeway, let them go as fast as they want to go on that freeway, but provide them a lot of exit ramps with very quick assistance to help unstick them. And if you do that, you'll be architecting a really frictionless, valuable experience for clients that really is in line with where their needs and expectations are going. I thought that this was really impactful. We're seeing this a lot as it goes into CX, partially from how do you analyze and summarize large bits of data. It's really opening the door for general text analytics as a part of this. And that is, what you're probably seeing and reading about everywhere else. You're going to see it here as well, which is the impact that AI is having on this space. And what I really wanted to focus in on, there's been a lot that's been written about the generative AI models. The thing I wanted to focus in the most on is just how rapidly the improvements are happening. So when you look at the left-hand side of this, this is GPT 3.5, the first GPT model that was publicly available from OpenAI. And then you can see GPT 4.0, which was released roughly 6 months later. And just look at the law exams, the biggest one as a part of this. But passing the bar exam, it was in the 10th percentile. Then 6 months later, it was in the 90th percentile. You're seeing it on the GRE, you're seeing it on the statistics placement. It's just massive how quickly these models are improving. And we're seeing that impact within the customer experience space as well from a couple of levels. First of all, from what you can do with the data, but also from what the expectations clients have for their ability to access information and to get insights from that information. The power of transparency. This has been around a lot. You've seen probably presentations. I've done presentations on this, the consumerization of B2B buying, and the data just continues to support it. Your team, your people are the least trusted of anybody. This is data from Forrester. We've done data within the professional services space that really mirrors this. At the end of the day, I trust my peers, I trust my friends, I trust anybody who's working with you now and sort of their experience, the more unfiltered we can give that. And then I sort of trust experts. And then last and least, I trust you because you have a vested interest in convincing me that your firm is better than the other ones. This is a little bit blurry on the screen, but this is Forrester's kind of transparency and trust coefficient. And you can see, things like accountability, consistency, competence, dependability, empathy, integrity. And then they've really brought transparency to the forefront and as the last component of this. And we're seeing much more of that where there's information symmetry happening because there are places where people can see what that experience is like and they don't have to rely on you sort of telling that story. When you look at the brand reputation versus the professional reputation and who the client is committed to, what we see is that in many cases it's both, but if there is a commitment to one versus the other, it's about 3 times as likely that they're committed to the professional they're working with versus your firm. And so one of the key areas when we look at client experience, and one of the things that we see a lot of people doing is how do we get multi-threaded in these relationships so that we have multiple contacts at the client and the client has multiple contacts with us so that we are bigger than the individual, bigger than the professional as a part of this. And then the last trend that we're really seeing on this is just, you don't have to, there'll be no quiz. You don't have to memorize this. This is from Gartner. This is their mapping out of the B2B buying process as it sits today. And the big thing I want you to take away is that it's just incredibly complex. In a study that we did, we found that about 3 in 4 said that the most recent decision about which professional service firm to engage with was significantly more complex than it had been in the past. And that's forcing people to be more risk averse. There's more times when people are just choosing not to make a change because they get overwhelmed by the opportunities. So that means for us, we have to really do a good job of bringing this to the forefront, and being not just the best option, but perceived as the least risky option. So that's a key component on that. So before I go deeper into this, next section here, which is going to be what the top firms do differently, I want to bring you in, Nathan. And if we have questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A tab. But I did want to kind of get your lens on this. You look at this through the role of product, and what, as you look at this, what do you think are kind of some of the fundamental truths that we're going to see continue to evolve in CX strategy, and sort of how that impacts how you look at the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things that really has, as I've looked at this data and looked at these trends over the years, that really just struck me is ultimately how CX has to adapt to the customer journey. Like we've been doing, and you and I, we've been in this business for 50, 20 years almost now. There's been a lot of change over all that time of how feedback was collected, how client satisfaction was determined, from the old days of paper surveys and phone calls and things like that. But really what's happening now is there's just this more and more demand, especially as you into these younger generations who are coming into the buyer seat, to understand where they're at in the journey. So you're asking me how good the experience was 8 months after I had the experience. You don't really understand where I'm at in that journey, and that feedback is far less impactful. That's definitely one of the trends that is impacting a lot how we're looking at how we develop our product, and just overall, like, how do you transition and transform sort of the next evolution. That's the big one. There's also, just looking at ultimately at the end of the day, these are service businesses. We're all in a service business. Humans still matter. AI is incredible and is really, really impactful and will help a lot to automate a lot of things. But at the end of the day, the human still matters in that relationship. And so how do you blend those to really ultimately help the customer have the best experience possible through automation and things like using AI, but ultimately not lose that human touch, which really matters too. So I
Yeah,
think
it's
those have
it's
been
like
some of the big ones.
it's like the next iteration of personalization, right? Because
Yeah.
we used to joke and still sort of joke around it, like the lack of personalization that it used to be in sort of email requests for surveys, right? And one of the things that we used to always tell us is, like, if you say "dear valued client," which a lot of people used to do, the one thing is that you're not a valued client, right? Because if you were a valued client, then they would know your name. And so this is, to me, this journey-based approach is that next level of really personalization that's on there as well. There's a question in the audience that came in that says, can you give a few examples of how you see OpenAI impacting people's CX programs?
Yeah, the most obvious one is the one that we're spending a lot of time right now, using and exploring and researching, is just getting insight from data quickly. It's
Yeah.
really good at that. Now, it does hallucinate, and there are those things that are real problems you have to overcome. But just the amount of time, amount of hours it takes to process a lot of open-ended survey feedback, which is where a lot of the rich data really lives, the rich insight. A human doing that is just takes a ton of time, but you can do as good of a job, if not even better, using these tools, and then even expanding that, looking across industry data and things like that. It's very effective in that. That's really where we'll probably use it the most. I think there's this whole idea of sort of authenticity over automation when you've got when you're looking at this from making sure that you don't lose the human touch. I do think that's where AI will be interesting. It can very effectively craft emails and things and messaging to folks, quickly. But ultimately, are people going to be able to sniff out like, this isn't a real person, right? So I think that is, I don't know that that's problem solved, but that is definitely one of those things we're kind of looking at how do you make sure it's still authentic. I mean,
Yeah.
what, so yeah, you've been doing this forever, just like I have. Like, what else stands out to you that's changed over all these years in CX?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and it kind of dovetails with what you were saying, which is this used to be a static exercise, and it's just not
Yeah.
anymore. You know, it was a static exercise that was done, you know, one time a year that made sense for me, and it was done, and then we would produce a company-wide report, and that's just not how we see firms doing it. It's probably a good transition into this next section, which is what the top firms are really doing differently. I'm just seeing really the people at the forefront of this are viewing this as a method, and one of the ways that they're having a conversation, and it's a one-to-one conversation, right? You, Nathan, as my client, are giving me feedback. I'm taking action on that feedback, as well as sort of the culmination of all the Nathans that gave me feedback. But the ability, you know, it used to be that nobody would push this out to their professionals directly. And now the best programs that we see are absolutely critically important that their professionals are getting that feedback, and they're trying to figure out how to get that feedback to them in an even more efficient manner. And that's where some of the integrations and some of those key things really matter a lot, that we'll talk about. So let's go through this piece of it. And this is, I won't go in full detail on this, but we really view this as kind of 5 stages, right? Starting at stage 0, which is you're really not doing anything along these lines. You think that you're delivering a good, consistent client experience, but you have no real proof, whether it be, other than maybe a few comments of people that have said, hey, you're doing a great job. The phase 1, this report card phase, this is really where the vast majority of people kind of live, or have lived. What we're seeing now is a real push and a real movement to this phase 2, which is the operationalized version of this, right? So you're really impacting now retention. You're really impacting referrals, and sort of starting to move that forward. CX centric is now where you're seeing this as a living, breathing growth tool. It's not a report card, it's a roadmap. It is how you're gauging sort of how to go to market. It's a part of your value proposition, your brand promise internally. People know it and they understand it, and they know they've got both the visibility into how they score and the accountability to know that it matters to the firm. And there's really this CX driven piece of it, right? Which is taking that next level, and you're really effectively sharing how you differentiate, how you're strong in the experience that you're delivering for clients. You're doing it, bringing that information into the tools of record and systems of record at your firm. Data quality is a major focus. Action is a major focus. You recognize that NPS is a leading indicator of what matters most to you, which is revenue growth, retention, gross margin, account expansion, things along those lines. So that's really kind of where we're going and where we see a lot of firms in that area. You had mentioned this a little bit of understanding the journey, and looking at the journey across this. And this is just a handful of examples here. We have a lot of clients in the accounting space and the legal space. We have a lot of clients in the recruiting space, consulting space. And so we're kind of sharing a number of these that we see on here. And I think that one thing to keep in mind is that you may still have an annual survey. It still may make sense for you to do an annual sort of relationship style survey. But then you start to look and say, okay, what are some other triggers? And the biggest thing that you want to look at, right, is you start and you look at the journeys. What are the key journeys that people go on, whether it be sort of end of matter, mid matter, end of engagement, mid engagement, new hire, new client onboarding. These are all really kind of unique journeys that we see within professional services, and they really deserve to have an understanding of what that experience is like, have questions that are really tailored to that part of the experience as well, and being able to go through that. And then I can't state this enough, the integrations are so critical on this. We maintain 4 integrations. We just launched Aviante in the staffing and recruiting space. We've got HubSpot coming at the end of the year, 2024. HubSpot's been wildly popular within the accounting space specifically. And a fair number of our law firms are utilizing that as well. So we're continue to bring this forward and look for ways to not only automate on the front end, but really probably as important, maybe more importantly, is bringing this information back in a compelling way that we're writing back to the CRM or the ATS, so that you can really then start to automate some of the solutions and the follow-up on that as well. And then really taking a different look on this. When we look at the firms that are getting the most out of this, they're not just looking at, hey, tell us how we did. They're looking at having this opportunity to say, hey, tell us what we can do differently, what else we can do as a part of it. And so that's a key component as well. And so we've started to ask these questions. What we found is that for every 100 completed surveys, the typical firm's getting around 26 new opportunities that are coming out of this. And we can help you kind of word that question in a way so that it doesn't feel salesy, and it really is sort of delivering that value. So I want to share just a couple of examples of some success stories that we've had. One was in year 3, they kind of lost their way a little bit, 12% detractors. They cut the detractors by about 50%. So they have that now down to 8% detractors. And really what they did, it was pretty fascinating. And this is in the staffing and recruiting space. It was really around field accountability. And it was really driven by the operations leaders. This is one of the things that is interesting, is a lot of times in professional services, the marketing team is leading the CX program. We're seeing more and more true CX related job titles, CX functions, CX responsibilities, but more often than not, it's still living within the marketing piece of this. And so for you marketers, what I'll tell you is that's fine, but you have to find a way for this to matter to the people that are leading the operational side of the business. And if you're on the operational side, you should be calling for this information. You don't want this static. You want this dynamic. You want this to be an early risk, an opportunity identifier, and really driving that through. And this firm did a really nice job of that. The other example that I want to share, even more of an impact on their detractor side of it, they had 20%. So 1 in 5 of their clients was a detractor, which was pretty brutal at the start of this. And they dropped it down to just 4%. And the way that they did this was actually more at the policy level, and really driving engagement with the survey. So they had a leading response rate up close to 40% on this. They really focused on closing out issues quickly. And so their closed loop process was really, really strong. And as they got that engagement internally on that closed loop process, what they found was that they were actually avoiding issues much more regularly than they had been before, because of that engagement and because their team was really paying attention to those types of things. The last thing I'll say on this, and then I see there's a couple questions, one in the chat and a couple in the Q&A, and I want to bring Nathan back into this conversation, but it's really hard. Clients are demanding. Clients are at times irrational. Clients often make things more difficult, not less difficult. And so when you have people that are doing a great job, shine the light on them. Pay attention not to just your top NPS scores, but also look at the ones that are improving NPS the most. That matters a lot as well, right? And so I'm a big fan of really leaderboarding some of these and making sure that people get excited about improvement, because that is such a key area as a part of this. So with this, I'm going to start out with a question I have, and then I've got a couple questions from the audience here, Nathan, as well. You're on the calls with a lot of our top customers and kind of helping them get through the technical hurdles. What are the most common technical hurdles that you see them facing with the automated feedback? And maybe you can kind of hit on that a little bit. And then, little precursor, we've got a little bit more in depth on that on the roadblock section.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a tale as old as time. If you've really tried to do any sort of automation around your clients, it doesn't really matter what it is. It's the right data, having the right data in the right place, where you can actually leverage it. And then ultimately IT time. That's always ends up becoming one of the roadblocks. IT is stretched thin at pretty much every organization I've ever worked with. They never have enough time. And so trying to get those two things aligned is certainly the thing that I spend a lot of time with customers. But yeah, we'll talk later about some ways I think you can sort of try to mitigate that stuff as much as possible, some strategies around that. Um, so I mean, so you're asking about technical hurdles. What other hurdles, non-technical, do you see? And I think we've got even a question that sort of alludes to that same thing.
Yeah, Judy. Judy had really the question that we were going to go to on this anyhow, which is, yeah, how do you successfully inspire highly tenured firm leadership to get over their perception that our customers like us, they're loyal, they pay their bill. Why do we need to spend all the time and money to do CX? Especially since leadership commitment is essential to build and grow CX initiatives across the firms. You're hitting on probably the biggest, one of the biggest barriers that I see on this, and it's actually the first barrier that we're going to go into detail on, which is getting that leadership buy-in. Because at the end of the day, what happens, there's a variation of that, right? It's either, well, people don't respond to surveys, or I don't respond to surveys, or all of these things as a part of it. But that's probably the most common barrier that we see, is that you've got marketing leadership or CX leadership that sees the value in this, but the executive team sort of assumes that it happens just on its own organically without really putting the strategic direction on this as well. The other sort of non-technical barriers that I see on this, you'd be amazed, Nathan, at how many people just overcomplicate this. For a methodology, we utilize Net Promoter Score as our kind of lead. But the whole point of Net Promoter Score is, that to basically say, hey, we didn't need 40 questions and a 80-page report that took 2 months to produce. We need to know a couple things from clients on a regular basis. And from that spot, we've now kind of ballooned again, where I was talking, I think I told you this, I was talking to a prospect the other day. And they said, hey, we've got 6 different business units. And within that, we've got, 21 different variations of the survey. And each one of those variations was, surveying at a different point, different questions. And there's a fine line on this, right? Because if you're an accounting firm, what you ask and who you ask and when you ask for a tax client is going to be different than, say, assurance or advisory. But you want to keep that core pretty common. Everybody kind of thinks that they're a unicorn and that they're different. But in general, what we would rather do is uncover with consistency and focus most of that time back on improvement, as opposed to focusing on the other side of it. So we have another question in the Q&A tab here before we go to the next section. And that question is, when you see firms that really get this right, how do you know? And I'll answer this first, which is they just grow faster. Full stop. They grow faster. I mean, we've modeled this out in both accounting in staffing. And when you look at the ones that are CX focused, we looked at the top 100 in staffing and in accounting. And the firms that we know are working with us, so we're making a sort of broad assumption that those firms are CX focused. Those firms outgrew the other firms by such a significant margin. It was so clear that they were gaining some economic impact from the fact that they were really focused on that client experience. And so I think that that's one way that you can sort of see the fruits of the labor there as well. Do you have anything else that you'd add to that, Nathan?
No, I would just say, like, when we dug into that data and made that connection, that's huge. And back to Judy's question, I think that was one of the most compelling ways you can convince leadership. Like, you can't get around the fact that the firms who focus on CX, they grow faster, and at the end of the day, it's more revenue for everybody. And so that I don't know that it gets much more compelling than that, because at the end of the day, that's what we all got to do, is figure out how to grow.
Yeah. So let's dive into this next section, because some of the questions that I've seen so far are things that we're actually hitting on this area. And so, the first one, overcoming common roadblocks to success. And I love sort of Mythbusters, and I love geeking out on that piece of it. And so since I can't, explode something like they do on that show, hopefully we can at least explode a couple of common myths. That leadership buy-in, we can't afford to invest in a program right now is something that we'll oftentimes hear. But the reality is that if you cannot really sort of articulate how quickly you can get to an ROI on a CX investment, then you're missing that opportunity. And that goes, Nathan, to what you're saying, which is bring that data back and show them on this. But we've run this multiple times. And if you look at sort of our typical program, if we can save you, identify one at-risk account that you save, you've typically paid for that program for 5 to 10 years. In some extreme cases, even more. Professional service clients in general are, upwards of 100,000, if not more than 100,000 a year on average, right? Not all of them, but on average as a part of that. So you really only have to save one of those, and you've paid for it for, 5+ years as a part of it. And in general, people typically can get a much higher ROI on that because they're identifying much more at risk, and they're using it to grow, and they're using it to identify expansion, cross-selling opportunities as well. We don't have time to have our professionals asking for feedback. We hear that a lot as well. It should be efficient, right? If you do this the right way, we focus really on you should be spending 80% of your time taking action on this, not on sort of pushing for that piece of it. But the reality is that you also have this opportunity, and we actually did this. We had a large recruiting firm that had this, and so what they did is they looked at order volume what in the 2 weeks that the survey was open, and they ran this a couple times a year. So they had a little bit of data from the last couple of years. What they found was that the order volume went up while the survey was in the field. So while they were actually reaching out, asking people, hey, we'd love to get your feedback, they were actually creating more opportunities than they were in a typical week of business development. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? This is a good excuse to reach out and to do some relationship building. And that naturally leads oftentimes to, oh, I'm glad you reached out. I wanted to talk to you anyhow about this, or, you kind of go into that conversation. This is my favorite one. This is the difference between correlation and causation that you hear people talk about. Correlation is not causation. People go out, oh man, every time we send out the survey, we get a bunch of issues as a part of this. Well, the survey is not creating those issues, right? The correlation there is that you're finding out about those issues because the survey is helping you uncover those. It's not creating those issues as a part of it. And if you ignore all those issues, then you're going to end up just with fewer clients to serve as a part of that. So the big point on this is to help people understand that you are actually uncovering issues when they're small as opposed to when they're huge as a part of this. And I think that's a key piece of this too. So, our clients don't want to respond to a survey. We actually asked clients, and even if they don't respond, it was something like 70% that said that if they get asked to give feedback, they generally believe that it's a good sign for the relationship as a part of it. So you have to understand that even if they don't respond, that doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't created a positive impression there as a part of this. So, the myth busting, Nathan, what kind of resonates the most out of these?
Yeah, I think the thing I hear a lot when I talk to folks is really that can't afford to invest. But what it really oftentimes is not just like the dollars for the program, but the time it takes to get the system up in place, especially if you're really looking to get beyond that report card and really automate that. So that's a very real thing. But as the product person, I kind of look at it differently a little bit. Is that I just haven't done enough yet to help you understand what the actual ROI there. So you really should feel like there's no reason you couldn't invest or shouldn't invest. That and that's really about how do we continue to build a product that helps you understand that. And I think as you look at your CX programs, wherever you're looking, that it should be really clear what that ROI is. That's something that sort of keeps me up at night, is how we communicate that, because I know it's there. I see it all the time. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, at times, we're maybe too close to this and it seems obvious to us, but you talk with, execs all the time. What are their reasons? What do you see?
Yeah, I think that it's a lot of what you're talking about there, right? Which is that they don't necessarily feel that they have an information gap. As soon as somebody feels like they have an information gap, then it just makes sense, right? As soon as they get blindsided once, as soon as the survey program identifies an account that's upset with them that they didn't know about it, that's when we really notice this. And the analogy about the frog that's in the pot and the heat just gets a little bit hotter, a little bit hotter, a little bit hotter, and it doesn't jump out, versus if you drop them into boiling water, they hop out immediately as a part of this. I think there's some of that analogy that actually makes sense here too, because what happens in professional services oftentimes, especially with larger accounts, they're so ingrained with the firm that they're working with that you don't really notice it. It's not like you go from $1 million account to nothing overnight. What happens is you go from $1 million account that could be growing to a $1.5 million account, and instead yours is going to a $950,000 account, and then a $700,000 account, and then a $600,000 account, right? And so it's kind of this war of attrition as a part of it. And so that's, I think, the place where we run into this. The other thing that I think happens a lot, and if you remember back to when we first launched Best of Staffing as a part of this, we had all these conversations about, oh my gosh, like people are going to want to change the survey questions. They're going to want to go at a specific time. They want to do this. And what we found was that like the adoption of that program went through the roof compared to what our expectations were. And the lesson that we came out of it was that when you have a million different questions and a million different choices to make, you tend to sort of get this analysis paralysis, and you don't move forward at all because you have this paradox of choice, right? And there's too many things that you could be doing. And so that's the other advice I would give people on this too, is like start simple, start with a very straightforward, start with our standard questions, start with a one audience as a part of it, right? And just do it, because once you start to do that, then it starts to build on that, and you start to get demand, and people are like, well, wait, how do we not have this for our new client onboarding process? Well, that's great. That's what you want, right? As a CX leader, you want people coming and saying, hey, can we get more of this? Can we get this in a more regular cadence there as a part of this? Look, I don't want to brag. I know I'm a researcher and a statistician by trade, but I made all these silos in PowerPoint myself, all these images on the screen. I'm pretty proud of them. I definitely did not show Michelle or our marketing team ahead of time, because I don't know that they would have let me do it. But the point I was trying to make is that we have a lot of different systems. And one of the things that we really run into a lot for integrations is that people don't have the right information in the right system. I didn't even tell you this, but I ran into one the other day that we were talking through, and they have a time tracking system that they're using, project management time tracking. And then they have Dynamics as their CRM. And I was like, oh, this is great. It's perfect. They're like, well, wait a second. We're actually bringing on HubSpot as our marketing automation on that. And so we're bringing in another piece. I said, well, we'll be able to handle that as well. But the amount of information that resides a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, time tracking and billing kind of tells us, who should be getting sort of, the opportunity to give feedback at an organizational level, but then the CRM is kind of telling us who the individuals are as a part of that. And the HRIS system is oftentimes seeing like where should these results go, right? Who should be getting this feedback? Who should be following up on it? And then you've got marketing automation over top of that as well. And so one of the things that what do you typically see here, and what are some ways around imperfect data that you see people doing?
Yeah, this is a very big problem. I think overarching, I would say, really that old adage of perfect is the enemy of good is a great attitude to have when you go into this, because you won't get perfect. Nobody has it. I've never seen it. Never even seen close. But at the end of the day, if you don't start somewhere, you're never going to get anywhere. And so what I've seen been most successful for people is really starting out small, maybe looking at, if you're going to want to get to the fully automated, really triggering on the customer journey, start with maybe just one practice area or a particular branch location. And start there to start to figure out what data you would need to do that. And and also the other thing, because a lot of times it's not even just that the data is in different places, that people don't trust the data.
Yeah.
Data is, needs to be improved. And ultimately what I've seen over and over and over again is that it's never going to get better unless there's a dependence on that data that is got some accountability to it.
Yeah.
So it's human behavior. If no one's going to, if I can put this data in one way and it's not going to matter to anything, no one's ever going to see that, and you have no automation, no accountability of that, then it's not going to be great data. But we have worked with a lot of companies who have gotten into these full automations, and the data gets magically a lot better, a lot faster when you do that, because now people know it's going to be used for things, and there's going to be some automation on it, and people are going to see that it's not right. So that's huge, and it's just the way us humans are. But that's the one companies I've seen been most successful. And then the last thing I would say is, almost no matter what industry you're in, any sort of automation is built off of a date. Like, that's just fundamentally how it works. It's like in a staffing, when a placement started, and accounting, could be a variety of things, but typically engagement end, engagement start, things like that. So if you have any opportunity to get a single, key moment of truth type of date synced across systems, those are the firms who have been successful at getting these journey-based automations going. And that's typically not super hard to do. It's not trivial, but that's what I've seen work.
Yeah, I was just on a call today that I thought was really interesting. It was a firm that's wanted to fully automate. They're a Microsoft Dynamics and long-term client of ours, and they finally figured out, oh, we've got this trigger now that we can have this happen. And so they use Star, which is a time tracking and billing software, but they've got Dynamics as their CRM, and so they're now have the integration between those two to get the right information to Dynamics, which is where they want to manage this whole process. But they figured out that, hey, we still don't trust our professionals necessarily to put in the right information, the dates, but there's an administrative function that is utilized to record some of these key things. And that group is actually very detail oriented and very consistent and process oriented. And so now they've got that trigger, because they're like, okay, when they do this, that does mean we have confidence that we're to this point in the journey. And so there's oftentimes creative ways that you can kind of get around this. And the other thing that I'll say on this too is that you should really look at data integrity. Sometimes people will say, well, we can't really automate our surveys because we don't trust our data. But just think about how much that's impacting every other thing that you do, right? Your ability to utilize that data to target out, to provide marketing automation. Like, if you don't trust your data for a survey, then you can't trust it for almost anything else either. And so really kind of understand that quality of that data is the absolute foundation for everything else that you're doing, including the survey automation. So employees don't value the feedback, right? And this is I've got kids, and I feel like oftentimes, anytime I try to correct anything or give them feedback, this is sort of the look and feel that I get from them. And so there's a couple things that I've seen that are really important on this. The first of which is that it's human nature, if you only expect to see sort of a negative on something, it's human nature, right? There's never a time when I go to the dentist and the dentist says, hey, you know what? Great checkup. Here's $25. Let me buy you lunch, right? So I never look forward to going to the dentist, because there's no upside. There's only the potential of downside. And that's, I think, what you have to fight a little bit when you're doing any kind of a feedback program on this, is that you don't want it to be a dental visit. You want it to be equal parts positive. And in fact, we kind of strive to have about a 5-to-1 positive to negative. And because what you really want is, you want people to actually start to get hungry for this, right? You want them to feel good because they're getting a lot of shout outs and they're getting a lot of recognition and accolades. And that way, when they get that negative, and when they get sort of identified that, oh, this, we felt like this was kind of a ball that was dropped, it doesn't really feel that dramatic, and they can really kind of dive into it. So there's a couple things to really look for. And then the last thing I'd say on this is that, if you're giving recognition and celebrating it, and you're tying it to their objectives in the same way that you would other KPIs, and now and you still can't get them excited about it, you might just have the wrong person, right? You should be looking at how you hire and how you train for empathy and service orientation as well. That's a really kind of key piece of this. So Nathan, maybe talk about this, because I oftentimes say that I think that we might have the happiest CX platform in the world. But you from a very early stage, because you were kind of the godfather of the shout out feature, and we've kind of leaned in on a lot of those recognition components. Talk a little bit about that piece, and the choices that we've made, and things that you think people should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a human just like the rest of us, and I focus on all the negative just like everybody else does, and it's really hard to overcome that. So early on, that's really how we wanted to build our platform, to make sure that folks, have that outsized positive, information coming out of this experience, so that while you're still going to focus on the negative, it's almost impossible not to. It's also going to be impossible not to miss all the positive, that really just is coming through so strong. So we built that into the product, and really as where we're taking to, and this is even beyond what we're doing here, but back to sort of the key trends at the beginning of this presentation, you really, that personal reputation, that individual reputation of that, whether that's the recruiter you're working with, account manager, CPA, whatever that person is you're having that experience with, they're delivering an incredible experience, oftentimes, and they don't always have tools to really even communicate that. And so that's someone where, we think it's really important that those individuals also have ways to talk about how great their experience is, which is another way to sort of combat this. Like, I actually am, like, I get some negative things maybe sometimes, but I'm actually really good at what I do.
Yeah.
And so we're building more and more of those kind of tools into our platform to give the individual their own star rating and profile pages and things like that, to really help them just continue to be able to not only improve it in the market, but feel good themselves too, that they really do a great job at that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that the what I would also say on this too is that what you want is you want people to feel that pride. What I've experienced is that you've got a typical bell curve that you would see in a lot of different situations, right? You've got some people that they're just never going to be that service oriented. They're just not built that way. And then you've got some people, that are always going to be service oriented, right? These are the people that, and we all know them, right? We've all had account managers, we've worked with them or whatever. It's like they can't handle it if a client is upset. They can't handle it if they could be doing more for a client. They'll kind of naturally go above and beyond. But then you've got this massive spot in the middle, which is like maybe 70-80% of people that can really be shifted one way or the other, depending on how we shine the light as an organization on this as well. And I think that that's a key component there that we need to kind of keep track of. So now moving from measuring to improving, this is another key area here too, right? You don't want to just have the Fitbit. You want to have the Fitbit that's now driving a change in behavior as a part of this, so that you're working out. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with these programs as well, right? You want to look at both achievement and improvement, more visibility and accountability to the front line. You should have at least one, if not multiple, CX related KPIs that are on the same level as, whether it's hours or growth or billable time. You want to have another one that's up there that's CX oriented. And I think that that's a really key component there as well. And then, really tying this to financial improvement. We're seeing a lot of the firms that we're working with now that are doing some really exciting work around actually taking this and looking at, the markets where we are doing really well on CX happen to also be the markets that we're growing the fastest in, right? And that's another place where, correlation, there is a little bit of causation on that. And we've run that for firms as well. It's a really critical way to look at it. So the firms that you see that really kind of have this as operationally imperative, Nathan, how have they gone from kind of that report card to the roadmap?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Number one is really back to what I said towards the beginning. Like the firms who really make this operational and grow the fastest because of their CX focus on CX are really the ones that understand that the customer journey matters way more than their own schedule. That's a big shift. It's hard to do. It's not easy, but ultimately, when we see success, it's folks who really are able to understand that I need to ask, I need to engage with the customer at this point in time because it matters ultimately in their journey, not just because it's the most convenient time for us to be able to get a survey out. So that's definitely number one. And then number two, at least from what I've seen, it's like getting that visibility and accountability down to the people who ultimately impact the service. Like I was saying, being we're humans sell things to other humans. And they service those relationships. So ultimately, if the people who are providing the service don't have the feedback, they don't know, they don't have the insights when, at the times that make sense to have that, it's really hard to change because it's not very frequent that you see like a feedback come in that's some really high level thing that can be changed at the leadership level, and it immediately makes everything better. So that occasionally happens, like a billing system problem. It's like
Yeah.
really affecting everybody. It's terrible in one fix, and you can get past that. But most often, it's an individual type of thing. So if you're not getting that data to them, it's just really tough for them to make change. So that's what I see. I mean, what have you seen? The biggest mistakes you've seen people making around this?
Yeah, I think it's that painting with a really broad brush, right? The reality is that the vast majority of improvement happens in terms of how people execute the process as opposed to a flaw in the process. For every one billing issue that is a process-oriented challenge, there's a dozen things that are unique to how I service a client versus how you service a client versus how the next person services a client. Those are kind of the key areas there as well. So
Yeah, I'll add one
oh yeah,
quick thing to that because I think it's important. It's a good one of the things that I've seen too is you have to understand because of exactly that. You have to understand the behaviors that drive that experience, and so those
yeah,
behaviors generally are things that are pretty simple, like did my question get answered within a reasonable amount of time? So when you're building a CX program, we build this into our tool already. Trying to ask those additional behavior type questions gives you the data you need to go to the individual and say, hey, here's where you need to improve. Here's where you're behind in this particular type of behavior.
yeah.
That stuff's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is the last kind of roadblock that I want to talk through. And then we'll take any additional questions here and we'll wrap this up here in about the next 5 minutes or so. But we look at this, and trying to develop what we might call a sixth sense, right? There's all these different ways that you can get feedback and you can understand a little bit. And if you put them all together, you start to get a pretty good picture of what the client health is. And certainly the surveys are part of this. Interviews, a lot of people have interview programs. I constantly am telling people, look, it's not one or the other on this. They both have really significant value. Reviews that we're getting online, reputation we're getting online, but then also looking at actions, right? If the last 4 emails that you sent to a client have gotten ignored, like that should tell us something. If we've seen, overall the typical client has grown 5, 8, 10% with us over the last year, and this client has been flat, like that also tells us a little bit something about this. So, talk a little bit about kind of the future of CX and, what role do surveys play in that future in your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I think about this, I'm thinking definitely long term. But ultimately, my mind, the survey just becomes one of a tool in a much larger toolbox. Ultimately, it's one input that can help you, just kind of as you're saying, that can really help you understand that client experience and the overall client health. And I kind of relate it to, you think about the medical field and how much over time all these different ways of measuring health of a person have been developed and become to give you even a better picture overall of what the health looks like and the system, because it isn't ever one thing, right? It's a system, and all these pieces sort of play together. And so when we look at the strategy, CX strategy, and where we're, want to go as a company, it's really sort of beginning to understand that survey is just one component ultimately of many different inputs that you really want. And what's really neat about some of the technology, all the different automations, AI, things like that, you can now take all of this data in ways that you never could before to really gain really unique insights out of that. So that's sort of, I think, some of the fun, exciting stuff that we have coming in CX.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's shift to, we just have a couple questions and then we'll let people go here. So there's a couple questions in the Q&A tab. The first one is, how much does online reputation matter in the client experience program? I'll start with this. I'll say it does matter. And in fact, sometimes a variation of the question, which I thought I was going to get, which was, which online reputation platforms matter. And what I tell people is, look, if you do a Google search on your brand and in the first couple of pages, whatever comes up matters, because that's exactly the same thing that clients and prospects are doing there as a part of it. So you want to be able to control that narrative. That's why we developed the profile pages that we have, is that you're sitting on top of this gold mine of probably the best information, right? If you could just sell a prospect and say, hey, here's every single person that we work with, what they said, like that is really the best information you have, better than any online review platform. And so we share that piece of it, but it can't be the only thing, right? Because if you have great scores with us and then you have terrible Google reviews, that's going to impact. And terrible Glassdoor. Like it used to be, I remember, Nathan, you remember when we would talk about like the employment brand versus your, it's the same. Everything's the same now. Like the people care how you treat your employees care how you treat your clients. It's all the same. It's all one big overarching brand now as a part of it. Anything that you would add to that in terms of the online reputation component?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, I'm shocked that we still even like this is sort of a debate sometimes whether it matters. Like the trends are just so clear, especially as these younger generations continue to become more and more buyers for all of our services. Like they look there, and we see it in all the traffic that we get to our website. And so absolutely.
Gen Y, in the most recent survey that we did, Gen Y trusted online ratings more than they trusted a personal referral, which is sort of staggering to think about it. But then you think, again, if I was to ask Nathan, like, hey, I'm going to go grab lunch downtown, what do you think? And he tells me a place I haven't heard of, why would I not go and see what 100 other people thought about going to that place? Maybe he loves a place that is barely passing the food inspection, and I'm going to hate it, right? And so I can test that and run numbers against that. So the best is when he recommends a place that's good, and then I go and I see that, oh, it's 4.7 and 150 other people said that. Well, now I've got two really credible points that make me feel like it's not a risky decision. And again, we talked about it earlier. We want to de-risk all of these decisions here as a part of this as well. So the last question that I'm going to just give on this is, one piece of advice for somebody that's trying to build this out for a B2B professional service organization, one piece of advice that you'd give them.
Just get started. I think so many people get stuck trying again, that perfect is the enemy of good. Just find a way to get something. Even, we've talked a lot about surveying on the customer journey, and that's critical, but you don't have to start there. You're not doing anything at all, which I'm still shocked at how many people don't have a regular, even an annual cadence of the same survey. Like just get that going. And if you're already doing that, great. Start working on the next step of how do we start picking off a small group, a small practice area, branch location, start getting some automation going and getting really tied into that customer journey. You just got to take the first step. I think that's often the hardest part.
Yeah. I think that's really, really good advice. Well, thank you, Nathan. I appreciate it. I always get a lot out of these conversations, and hopefully our audience did as well. For those of you that attended, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do so. I hope you found it valuable. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have questions that you think of 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, just reach out. Nathan and I love sort of geeking out on this stuff. And so if we can be helpful, we will be. And we're happy to give some insight or to share what we see other firms doing. But with that, have a wonderful rest of the day, a wonderful rest of the week. And thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you, everybody.